All right. Thank you so much for everyone for coming on to the show. I really appreciate it. I just realized I spelled something wrong in the chat there, so I had to go back there and fix that on the website there on YouTube. So thanks to everyone for joining. If you're going to join in the future, make sure you hit the like button on your way in. And if you're not a member of the channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button, all that kind of good stuff here. Today, I want to welcome my special guest here, Dr. William Lopez. Thank you so much for joining the show. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here, Dr. L. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again. Yes, we did a show back in 2020. It's been a minute.
Yeah.
I still have your book here, separated.
Okay. Thank you.
It's a good read. I certainly hope that everyone picks it up, particularly after this show. So if you would take a moment here and just tell the audience a little bit about who you are.
Sure. So thanks again for having me, Dr. L. As Lawrence mentioned, we spoke again, 2020. So that was after I had written the book that he showed you called Separated: Family and Community in the Aftermath of an Immigration Raid. And my work as a professor at the School of Public Health in the University of Michigan focuses on deportation and what it does to families, communities, often in the Midwest, often in rural areas, so away from places like my home state of Texas, right, where we have U.S.-Mexico border. So I continue doing that research in my position as faculty now, and I'm releasing another book on September 23rd, focused on large-scale worksite raids that happened under Trump 1. So these are the worksite raids in which anywhere from a dozen to a few hundred folks are taken out of a community. So keeping up with immigration, talking about immigration and health, that's the stuff I do, stuff of my job. And Dr. L and I crossed paths because we were both talking about policing and law enforcement in communities. So happy to have these conversations again.
Absolutely. So if anyone wants to check out the first episode that we did, let me see here. I think I got it here. So you can go over to what was formerly called Captain Hunter's podcast. It's now called Dr. L's podcast. You can go over and check that out on wherever you listen to podcasts at. Our handsome faces are not there. It's just the audio of us. But you can go over there, take a listen to that. It was a good episode. And I can remember speaking with you about, my time in law enforcement, having done being not so much part of the raids, but seeing the effects of what happened when things would go on. If you remember, I shared with you a story, and this was confirmed in your book, that a lot of times, unfortunately, people who come here who are undocumented will work, and then they get paid under the table, and then they are often targeted and victimized because they're working on the table. And of course, they don't want to call the police because they're not here. And there was a few times I can remember being called to home invasions when people would get home from work, and the undocumented worker would have their money stolen from criminals in the area. And of course, feeling so bad for the family because this man had been out working all day and brought home money to his family. And then, somebody in the area watched him come home knowing, their vulnerability and took advantage of that.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah. And you bring up, just in that story, you bring up so many good issues, right? So why are folks working under the table has to do with who we allow to work and when, but also why are they carrying cash, right? And it's often one thing folks miss is when you're undocumented, you don't have a driver's license in many states, not all. It's hard to get a bank account. It's hard to get a credit card. It's hard to any number of things. Pick up your pharmacy medications, right? So no bank account, walking around with cash. No matter how you think of immigration and immigration policy, Dr. L, as you say, these are community level issues, right? What do we do when folks have lots of cash? What do we do when they're not calling the police, right? All things we need to think about regardless of what side of the aisle we're on.
Yeah. So what made you decide to write the book and get into this line of work?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Sometimes you happen to be at the right place at the right time, or perhaps the right place at the wrong time, as the case would be here. But this is my home community, Washtenaw County in Ann Arbor, where University of Michigan is. And the raid that happened is 7 miles from my desk in Ann Arbor, right? And these are folks who I didn't know at the time, but I was in 1 or 2 degrees of somebody who knew them because I was volunteering with an organization, Washtenaw Interfaith Coalition for Immigrant Rights at the time. And at the same time, I was writing my dissertation, right? And so all of my work focused on just generally speaking, like Latino African American health, immigrant refugee health. But when this raid happened, and I happened to be volunteering with the organization that responded, then I was able to speak with the folks who were involved. So I continued doing that work because I continued to learn about what these raids were like and what they did to families and communities. And one of the things that I noticed is how the story of deportation here on the news is often really, really limited, right? It only tells one particular angle. And one of those angles is that it's usually men arrested and men deported. This is statistically true. But there's so many people left behind, children, wives, and as I've mentioned, communities, right? A big part of the story. And often those people left behind could be citizens, could be visa holders. So part of what I want to do is continue telling these stories of things that we don't essentially see on the news, right? This is a full emotional, human, and health experience. And because of the nature of the media, we often don't focus for very long. So we see an event, but we may not see the impacts that come after.
So let's start off with people who don't view the human element, as you just said.
Sure.
I want to say hello to Yoli. Hello to High Vibe, and hello to Leslie watching from LinkedIn. Okay. I think this is the second time somebody's ever commented from LinkedIn. These are some of my ride or dies from my other channel. So thank you
Wonderful.
to all three of you.
Hi, Yoli. Hi, Vibe, and Leslie. Good to see you all.
Yes. So these, as we were talking a little bit before, we had President Trump again running for his second time in office, saying he was going to do exactly what he did. Let's talk a little bit about why they are so hard pressed about this immigration issue. Can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah, immigration is an interesting policy. So throughout all of history, one of the things we've seen is immigrants themselves, right? Immigrants as a group of people, as a population, being a war shot test for our country's fears. And politicians know this, right? What I mean by that is they can project the country's fears onto immigration, onto immigrants themselves, and then kind of do things, and then do things to this population that they generally can't do otherwise, right? And what's happening with ICE is a great example. But we'll take a few examples. If there's fear of economic uncertainty, it's easy to blame on immigrants spending social service money. If there's fear of jobs being taken, right, it's easy to blame on immigrants taking jobs. We remember during the Bush years, if there's fear of identity theft, it's easy to blame on immigrants, right? So one of the things that we see is definitely politicians understand, and perhaps I won't say no one better than Trump because I don't want to word it like that, but Trump certainly understood well that he could use immigrants to tap into something that was going on at the national level. And what I will say is there was fear at the national level of immigrants, and he focused lots of energy on fear mongering. And how did he do that? Right? A few ways. He focused on stories of gang members, and he continues to do that. He loved, not as much anymore, he switched the gangs he focused on. He focuses on Venezuelan gangs now, but he really focused on Salvadoran gangs, if you remember earlier, machete-wielding gang members, right? Narcotraficantes, like drug dealers. And he also showed us, right? So he created this perfect villain. But then he realized what he needed to do was create this perfect victim to continue the fear mongering. And lots of what he did, if you remember, Trump would always foreground who he called angel moms. And those are folks who, as Trump said, someone in their life had died thanks to, or died because of an undocumented immigrant, right? So a statistical rarity, as we know, undocumented folks are actually less likely to commit crime than their citizen peers. But Trump foregrounded this. They were dangerous. And, according to the storyline, they killed people that were citizens, right? That made folks feel vulnerable, and it brought him into office. It got folks to support him on this protect us from these foreigners line of thinking.
How does that make you feel when you think about, how this continues to work? It worked, as we can probably go back to the 1900s to the 1920s, on and on. How does that make you feel to know that this continues to work? We have not evolved as a species to past the point of this crazy xenophobia.
Oh yeah, so we've done this for and by we've done this, we can see it in other countries as well. So it's certainly not purely the U.S. This habit of projecting fears onto immigrants is used by established powers, right? We did this with Chinese immigrants. We talked about opium dens, right? We did this with Irish immigrants. We did this with, and on, and we certainly do it with Latino immigrants now. How does it make me feel? Lawrence, perhaps it's wrong. I'm minimally optimistic that we'll catch on to history's pattern. Like, sometimes after a particularly catastrophic event or disaster, history reveals itself. We certainly saw that with the COVID-19 pandemic, when we were talking way back when. We saw racial fault lines throughout the country, right? Who's getting health care, who's able to take time off of work because of that disaster of COVID. And I'm hoping, though I hope we never reach the point where immigration and deportation becomes that disastrous. We're certainly headed in that direction. And I hope we realize what's going on before it happens.
Mm. Do you know the numbers right now? How many have been rounded up in this alligator Alcatraz?
Oh, yeah, I can give some numbers. So generally speaking, we know there's about 11 million undocumented folks in the U.S. Generally speaking, we know that Trump has advocated for 1,500 to 2,000 deportations a day. Miller and others have talked about 1 million removals a year. And to put that a little bit in scale, Trump recently suggested 3,000 arrests a day, right? And we weren't hitting the ICE was not hitting the 1,500 to 2,000 mark. Nonetheless, Trump ramped it up. And why is that? Because chasing a number allows for more investment and more enforcement, right? So it's not actually a number that the administration believes it will hit. It's a number to chase and get investment. Most folks deported, we remember when Obama was deporting folks, it was something like 490,000, so about 500,000 people. So 1 million people is an unheard of scale, right? It's a massive scale of people. We also know more about mixed status families, and that's a family in which somebody is, immigration statuses are different. Generally speaking, we mean one parent's undocumented and one parent is a visa holder or a citizen, and the children are citizens or visa holders too. And we know much more about the millions of mixed status families that we have now. We know things such as those kids don't get equal access to healthcare. The kid who was a citizen gets more healthcare than the kid who's not, right? Creates tension and challenges within families. So, to your question, that's some of the numbers, but you asked about arrests. Alligator Alcatraz, I do not know how many folks have been arrested there recently. I'm happy to talk about, what's even the right word for it, right? Surrounding this facility I know they didn't create a moat in alligators, but they're definitely leaning into that, to the visual. There was also just another number. I believe it was either from 6 to 8 individuals deported to South Sudan. Is that, if I'm not mistaken? And, this was a third country for 5 of those 6, meaning the Trump administration has started to deport people to countries in which they were not born and consequently have, no safety network, may not speak the language. And they have 6 hours to inform family and build a case, which is really problematic.
I mean, how barbaric is that to deport people to a place where they've never no no family ties? I mean, I don't even understand that. Is it just to send a message? Just to...
it's so, I remember like we used to have to make the argument that deportation was cruel. So deportation is currently an administrative solution to an administrative problem. That's how it's talked about. It's supposed to be a non-punitive solution, right? Which everybody, especially health researchers, but I would argue everybody knew wasn't or isn't true. But I used to have to bring evidence to make that case. And now it's like, who doesn't think of it as punishment and who thinks of it as humane, right? So, this is part of the split that I'm hoping we see, is that no matter what side of the aisle you're on, no matter how you feel about deportation, you understand that there's a range in cruelty, right? There's a range in how we treat people, and we want everyone to have due process. If it's okay with you, I'd like to think about Garrett's question. Anyone think that ICE can potentially turn on the population in general? Garrett, it's a really good question. So I will say that if ICE wanted to turn on the population, there would be a couple of things that needed to happen, right? And one of them we kind of see play out. ICE doesn't arrest folks who are citizens, right? Generally, they're arresting undocumented folks or non-citizens, unless there's other people in the vicinity. Then that's what's called collateral. But to arrest folks on the large scale, ICE doesn't have the resources to do that. But we see the use of National Guard and we see the use of police. And who are those police policing? Who are those police? Who are those police policing? The protesters. So what's happening is ICE is creating these tense moments in a community that, frankly, the police have to clean up after, right? Both in that no one's going to trust what's the saying? The man is the man. So like if ICE does something bad to your family, you're not going to trust the police the next day, and then there's literal cleaning up that the police have to do, like picking up you saw the pictures in LA of the person who had the fruit stand removed and ICE picking up, the police picking up his stuff, right? So I think, Garrett, I'm long-winded about this question, but it would need a couple of components, and I think ICE building this relationship with the police is a big one. I also wonder how much the police want to be involved in this. If I had to take a guess, I think they're in an incredibly awkward situation where they're arresting protesters some of whom are protesting things like the right to due process.
Let me try to weigh in on this question here a little bit too, and
yeah.
That is a big fear of mine, in all honesty. This question, because they have, their budget has been increased from something like $4 billion to now $70 billion when you factor in the detention centers that they're going to have to build and man and all that. It's a concern of mine because I think now that they are the largest law enforcement agency, bigger than the FBI. Or plan to be with this. So that's a fear of mine. It would take a stroke of the pen to cause mission creep to do something else. Well, the police can't handle this riot. The police can't, so we're going to call in ICE agents to work overtime. And next thing you know, they're doing the function of the police, or as you mentioned, the military or the Marines, which I still don't believe is legal to be doing. So that's a totalitarian fear of mine. Let me ask you about continuing with this. What do you think about them wearing masks?
Yeah, one of the most interesting points, let's bring up COVID again, right, is often law enforcement was pushing back against wearing masks. And now it's like you can't get ICE to take the masks off. I think the fact that, so for one, it's totally confusing what's going on. So for those who don't know, Garrett, you're kind of pointing this out too, but ICE is not the police. So they do different jobs, right? Like you can ask any former officer, they do a different job than ICE, right? They are separate organizations. But ICE wears a big old police on their vest, right? And like folks don't want them to, it needs to be evident that they're not police. They'll knock on the doors claiming to be police when they're raiding a facility, and they can't get in there without permission. But when you knock on the door and say, police, we want to talk to you, and they mean it they're using it and they're well aware of what's going on. ICE calls these ruses, and a ruse is when the individual with whom you're interacting is making a logical conclusion, but that you're never clearly stating, right? So you're not stating something illegal, but you're manipulating the environment so it's the logical conclusion. I'll give you another example. It is against regulation to dress as a DTE worker. That's the electricity company up here. It's not against regulation to have a clipboard, a cap, a ladder on your truck, and a polo shirt, right? So they're using the situation to their advantage, and having us believe their police is working to ICE advantage as well. Now I forgot where I was going with this, but you were saying, oh, the use of the masks, yes. So the what I was getting at is often if ICE is asking someone for whatever paperwork to get out of your car, etc., and you don't know if it's the police or not, your reaction's different. You may also call the police on the ICE mass agent with no badge number or no visible badge, right? So I think that's going to happen too, where folks are calling the police on ICE agents. It hasn't happened yet, and it has to do with the legal vulnerability of those ICE's, probably trying to arrest. But I do think it'll happen. Also, again, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, we do believe in our country in the accountability of government representatives and employees. And if we don't have employee badge numbers, we don't have names, there's just no way to hold anyone accountable, right? So no one in ICE is elected. And now we don't know who anyone is. Like, these are all masked stormtroopers from top to bottom. Like, this can't be how an enforcement department functions in a country that wants accountability.
No, listen, I'm in 100% agreement with you, and I don't like it as a former law enforcement officer for the exact reasons you talk about, the accountability. And the head of the ICE has said that these guys are being doxxed and videotaped and all that, which I certainly don't agree with. I don't like it, when they try to do it to police officers, and I certainly don't want them doing it to ICE agents as well. But we got to come up with a better system, and at least, as you mentioned, have badge numbers, strict uniforms that everyone is wearing no matter what. Take the word police off and put ICE on there so we know exactly who they are. Standardized uniforms, a hierarchical system we can call supervisors. Comprehensive reports, about how we arrested and detained people. And also, what I wanted to chime in on is this, the strict hiring mechanisms that have to be enforced, right? They want to boost up, I forget the numbers of what they're at now, but they want to boost it up. Therefore, the increase in the amount of money that is being allocated under this big, beautiful bill. When you think about that, law enforcement already has a hard time hiring people. They're all police departments, almost all across the country, have just a difficult time. And if you lower the standards for ICE, I'm not saying that they have. I don't even know. I honestly don't know what the standards are. But police officers have to go to background checks and LIDAR and polygraph tests and psychological examinations, etc. I'm hoping that ICE has the same standards, and if not more. And you mentioned, the aftermath. After a raid, the police are there picking up, helping sort things out, calm the neighborhood down, et cetera, et cetera. I can tell you a lot of times that a lot of officers are very conservative, and they are in total agreement. I haven't interviewed anyone, but I know from my time on being there that they may not like the operational way that they're doing it. The deception that we talked about, ripping people away, and that lack of sensitivity that's going on. But I can tell you that they agree with what's being done. They might want to rethink about how much they're standing by, because again, they're left with the aftermath of trying to fix the problem that's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that aftermath certainly includes distrust of law enforcement. And what happens with distrust of law enforcement? Kind of the things that you just listed, right? More filming, more awareness of everywhere law enforcement is, more seeing law enforcement as the enemy. I think it puts the police in this hard position where ICE is unaccountable and can do something, again, right, ignoring due process and racially profiling, as we saw Tom Homan, who's the current, I believe, border czar, said, yeah, we will racially profile and you have no rights. Like you said, right, this is a conservative, liberal belief that no, people deserve due process. You, me, everybody on this call, right? So there has to be these regulations, and there has to be standards and enforcement mechanism. We know that police in this way, I won't expand to any others, so I'm only making this specific comparison, but are often like teachers, where they're dealing with all of the social problems, right, that other organizations can't address due to lack of funding. And in this case, what police are dealing with is broken families and communities that distrust people in uniform, right? And it's not it's because of the efforts of ICE.
Mm. I want to get to Leslie Hill's question. Dr. Lopez, have you seen the effects in attendance for your school, University of Michigan, students due to ICE? Also, have you communicated with any other professor at any other university? How are they dealing with all this?
Yeah, it's a good question, Leslie. So how would I answer that? In my classes, no. So one of the things that we certainly notice here, right, is the demographics. Surprise to all of us, demographics of Michigan are very different than the demographics of LA and California. But we see that critical mass of people in LA, where, whether it's often Latinos, Afro-Latinos, and immigrants who are able to protest immediately, also means when ICE is around, you see big examples of folks not going out in the street. You saw, I wish I remembered the university, but yeah, one university said, hey, don't come to campus because ICE is around.
Mm.
So I do, we don't see it specifically here because we don't have the same demographic breakdown, right? Meaning there's just often fewer undocumented immigrants here per students than there are in other places. What we do see is students throughout the country who no longer talk about being undocumented. And we remember there was a phase, there was a part of our history where lots of the undocumented advocacy was about what we would call humanizing our image of immigrants, right? This is what it means. This is my name. You don't have to just call me an immigrant or the I word, right? And we don't see that anymore, right? Folks do not disclose their immigration status because the administration is obviously fairly aggressive when that happens. And this is certainly what the administration wants. So changes of going to class, I would say it's also summer. So I would say we don't probably have evidence of that now, but changes in behavior generally, or even, changes in student, young adult behavior in the county. Yeah, I think that's happening here and the rest of the country.
Because it's a different demographically, what are you seeing and hearing in your neck of the woods there concerning whether they're for the raids, are they indifferent, or are they against it?
Yeah, one of the ways that I describe immigration enforcement in my book, when it's in a rural area or predominantly white area like ours, is it's often silent and lonely, right? It's a climactic, violent moment, whether it's taking someone from a car or, as I covered, going into a house or a workplace. There's activity, but then it's very cold and lonely and empty afterwards. You wouldn't believe how many times I've heard stories of uneaten meals, right? And people will describe it was the middle of dinner, someone was taken and the meal was just there and it never got eaten, and it got cold, right? And when you're a researcher, when you do this kind of work, when you hear a story over and over, you see the pattern and you have to look for the meaning. So, I would ask myself, why these stories of uneaten meals? But it's because these arrests interrupt these quintessential family moments, and then you never return to them. You never complete them, right? So it's definitely part of what happens when you're in a place where the demographics are different. There's fewer people to be aware of the raids, fewer people to talk about them, and fewer folks to protest. And that does scare me, because a lot of the advocacy energy we're building in LA really relies on massive numbers of people appropriately, and the work they've done is admirable, and we just don't have that same matching demographic. You asked me, Lawrence, if there's folks who are for or against, and I think, as I mentioned, it's just seen as something that happens in other states a lot of times. So there's not people who are vocal about it in the same way, because you don't really have to be, right? Unless it's on your radar, you seek it out, you kind of, you may not know that it's going on.
Kind of a similar question. You may not know about this or may not. Considering what happened with the what was going on with Gaza, Palestine, Is there a lot of protests on your campus about that, about Palestine, Gaza, and or about the raids, or other community centers, or what's going on as the campus buzz there?
Yeah, so the campus, so again, it's the summer, and U of M is really slow in the summer, but I would say in general there were protests for during Palestine, what the continued war in Palestine, of course, but at the inception, at the beginning, and throughout, until the end of the year. One of the things that's notable, right, is that the administration is using mask bans, um, to, to mask bans so that students don't wear masks. And part of the reason, we're thinking is that it increases the ability to surveil students at protests. And part of what we're
Right.
seeing at protests, is that we saw the arrest of, I believe his name was Khalil, right? A student who was protesting. He was arrested, he was detained, and eventually released. But to the earlier discussion that I think Garrett and you, Lawrence, were making, ICE can't arrest everyone, and if they do, when they arrest non-citizens, the way that they're, or rather citizens, the way that they're doing it is taking collateral. So you're focusing on somebody and you're arresting others. And this is, policing campus protests is one of the ways that I think that's going to happen again when the year starts, because many international students are aware of law, aware of the government, aware of international issues, and are involved in protests. And I think the administration's aware of that and is using it as an opportunity to police them and to police universities too.
That was exactly the point of me asking the question. That was going to be my follow up, because I was looking at the potential for crackdowns and what potential ICE agents would do. You mentioned, yeah, it's the summertime now, but the fall will be here soon. And how are they going to surveil these people? They're going to wear masks, and they're going to just walk around and surveil people. And the next thing you know, they'll be knocking on doors, on dorm rooms, and or classroom time, dragging people out.
Yeah. Well, and I think one thing that's interesting about this administration, right? So often administrations have to decide how visible they want their deportations to be, right? And so even though Obama was deporting 500,000 people, he didn't want them to be particularly visible. He wanted the number to be high, right? Because he wanted to show that he was going to enforce immigration law. Therefore, you can trust me. Therefore, let's have this immigration policy and law reform, comprehensive immigration reform. But Trump wants these to be seen. And, that was evident to me when I studied worksite raids, is that these are big and disastrous and chaotic, and not, for ICE, not necessarily financially efficient. You're not arresting as many people per the money you're putting in. But they're very visible. The border wall, even if its research shows it's infunctional, is very visible. So I think lots of these arrests are meant to be visible. And especially in LA, like these are often, I don't want to say media stunts, but made for the media to see, like walking through the park in a line, agents doing that, like they knew they were going to be recorded.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, what are your thoughts about them going to the farms, going to Home Depot, etc.? What are your thoughts about them doing that?
Yeah, there's so many things to think about, and primarily, and I see the comments are talking about the economic impact, which is great to hit on too. What my mind immediately goes through, just how this is going to screw with that whole community, how the impact it's going to have on the whole community, right? So, not the least of which is work, as commenters are saying. Immigrants are often doing jobs that are an essential part of the economy, right? And those jobs, don't get done. But one of the things that's easy to miss is immigrants are not just producers of goods, meaning, picking food and many other ways. Producing even includes things like cleaning hotel rooms, an often done job by folks who are undocumented, often women, but also consumers. And what happens when one consumer is vulnerable and no other consumers in that group want to leave and go buy things, right? You're also losing a community investment then. And one of the things that's really critical to remember, right, is that we see that undocumented folks are often, just like all of us, married to folks who are different in any number of ways. Undocumented folks are often married to folks who are citizens or visa holders, etc. Their kids might be a different status. So when one individual who's probably the driver doesn't want to go out to the store, to the restaurant, etc., usually that whole family unit's not going out and they're staying home. So, I think to Yoli's point, right? Yes, doing jobs that folks don't want, also making lots of purchases and contributing lots to the economy. So when I see that, I think, it's going to be a ghost town in that area, and the economy is going to suffer. The county's going to suffer. Taxpayers are going to suffer, and like taxes go to helping everyone. That's kind of the point of taxes. So, the ripple effects are large.
Mm. What is the solution to that? I mean, we often hear that certain people don't want to do certain jobs. You mentioned not only doing the jobs, but the economic tax base tax base in the community benefit that it has. Who are they expecting to, number one, do these jobs, and how do you replace? If let's just say we give a realistic number, let's just say there's 11 million and 1 million a year. Let's just say they get rid of 5 million people. Who's going to do these jobs? Who's going to fill that type of economic base? Do you consider that in any of your work or analysis?
Yeah, somebody mentioned it earlier in the comments, but sometimes I think this administration is just making that sacrifice. Like there will be sacrifices made, and the income, like tax base of local communities, will be one of them. The work in particular communities will just go undone, and that's the sacrifice that those politicians are willing to make for electability, right? And sometimes I think it's not particularly more complicated than that. This is the trade that they are making. If it's okay with you, I also think it's good to talk. So there's a question. Garrett says, "I'm pro arrest of undocumented folks. We cannot reward breaking the law." And that's one that I think we often hear, right? If you break the law, it's over, right? And so one thing is to think about what we do in the case of unjust laws. So many years ago, Lawrence and myself were not allowed to vote since we were not white. And then we were allowed to vote because we were men, and women were not allowed to vote, right? Those are unjust laws, and we worked to change those laws, and we didn't support those laws. And I think there's still some laws that would need to be changed. So I don't want to take it the default that because it's a law, it means it's objectively the best. It means it's objectively true and should be followed. Now, even if we're going to say that, like, yeah, but if it's the law, there are mechanisms to change it. Okay, let's hold that as a truth for just a second so we can, see what's the next step in the argument. Even in a place where we believe the law is the law, there are still certain protections, right? So we may be a country of laws, but we're also a country of proportional laws. And if you steal something, your hand is no longer removed, right? And it used to be a penalty. It's not anymore. This is the same thing we're thinking about with deportation. So if you, run a red light, and deportation to a third country with no due process is a legitimate punishment, right? Like we have to be a country of proportionate laws, and we have to be a country who defends a few, at least, certain rights. I keep coming back to due process. I keep, coming back to the right to protect yourself from unjust search and seizure, the right to a court-appointed attorney, although you don't get one in the immigration system. But these are things that I want for me, for you, for Yoli, for Garrett, right, for everyone, that we defend whether you've broken a law or not. So, I think even when folks are saying like the law is the law, yeah, but there are things that you do support, right? Even if one has broken the law, and we need to maintain that in this immigration discussion too.
Very good, very good. Let's walk through the psychological effects of this type of thing. That was a heavy component of your book, and you also mentioned the men who were mostly deported. So, what's the psychological effects and the long-term effects of what happens when the family's broken up? In particular, the male head of household usually is deported.
Yeah, so many psychological and health, bodily, mental effects. I think one of the lessons, the key lessons that I had, that I hope the audience takes away too, right, is we often focus on the deportation, but the way in which the arrest unfolds beforehand is also really, really important, right? So what kind of arrest is it? What kind of detainment is it? Did they go into your house, your car? Did they pick you up at courts? Did they kick in your door? Right? These all change. And back to the conversation of the law is the law, there are different ways to enforce the law, right? So the more traumatic ways of enforcing that law, such as raids into homes or work sites, stick with people, right? So PTSD happens when you see yourself or someone else at risk of death or possible death. And so many, over and over, folks would tell me I was scared I was going to die, right? Nobody leaves the country because they rest nicely. Like they were scared they were going to die over and over and over. And other folks would witness someone they were worried about dying, often a father, right? So there's definitely the weight of that PTSD. I think that's the one that's easiest to wrap one's head around. So I want to go with a couple that folks may not consider. One of the things that happens in a household that's often two-person is that, well, and I'll back up a little bit. Many immigrants are in households and many immigrants have children. Why? Because they're working jobs in which they need to be a little bit more physically active that are happening during your growing family years, right? Your childbearing years when you have young kids and they grow up. So lots of families. When you take the breadwinner away, you lose a couple things. For one, you lose a parent, and for two, you lose a driver. Folks often don't think about that, but often the mother is left behind, and is now dealing with the psychological weight of losing a father, the logistical demands of suddenly having to work, and the logistical demands of having to drive children around in a way that she perhaps didn't. All of us can imagine, like, oh yeah, that sucks to lose the breadwinner and the driver and the father, right? It's not like he's not an emotional figure as well. And then just to give two more of those ripple effects. Dr. Tanya Golash-Boza, sociologist at UC Merced, calls it sudden transitions to adulthood. So when an adult leaves, a younger child will move up in a developmental stage overnight. And this is easy to imagine. You didn't work, and the next day you have to work, right? You didn't care for kids, and the next day you have to care for kids. You're going to go to college. You can't go to college. You have to work. So you have all these kids who are moving upward before they are ready. And the last one I'll leave us with is Dr. Joanna Drebi talks about suddenly single motherhood, in which, as I kind of mentioned, right, a mother who was working or living with a breadwinner and a father is suddenly losing that, and now dealing with all the weight of everything that comes after losing that person that they love, that person who's a linchpin in the family, that person who's logistically important to everything else.
I hope this comes off as the best way, sensitive. Sensitive is the best way I know how to put it. Before we went live, right, I mentioned to you a book by Paola Ramos called Defectors. There's, we speak about the Trump administration. There was blacks for Trump, there's Hispanics for Trump, or whatever. Have you seen, what are your thoughts about that? Those two phenomenons. And in Paola's book, Defectors, she talks about kind of a buyer's remorse, or at least this, this is what you voted for, whether it's this particular situation or any other economic, there's a whole Trump backlash going on now with the Epstein files and with his wars, with his wars and all that. What are your thoughts about all that?
Yeah. I think it's groups who don't hold the power always fracture, right, as they fight for who's able to hold that power. And I think many racial minority groups have made that division of like, that's not me, that's them, and I'm better. And slowly folks are starting to realize, oh yeah, the folks in power, the administration allows me to say that until those folks that I'm better than are no longer there, right? So then you start to realize, like, oh, okay, this whole deportation effort and machine really has a bigger goal than just to deport the quote unquote criminals, right? Yeah. And there's lots of evidence of that. Already more than 50% of those detained have no criminal record. And I could talk, for a while about how a criminal record is also socially constructed and created in a particular way. I won't for now. I'll just say that more than half have no criminal record, right? So that line of demarcation that I think we make amongst ourselves, that I'm better than that person, I did it the right way, that's only going to last so long, and the administration slowly is collapsing those, and we're coming to terms with that. We're seeing many folks who did not believe they were the one who would be deported, and then they're deported, right? And because the administration is casting a wider net as it goes. I think also, something I've been thinking about a lot is this complexity with Latino community, where many of us do have ties to various countries of birth, whether our own or our parents or our grandparents. And I've heard stories or been in those countries and seen their governments and their police and seen the effects of, perhaps the narco state, the drug trafficking state, and bring those to the US, right? And so I think Trump really stoked that fear by, he talked a lot about Venezuelan gangs and bringing drugs. And many folks are like, oh yeah, this reminds me of a particular tumultuous time in Venezuela, Honduras, Guatemala, right? Where I wouldn't want the government to be like that. Never mind that if you look up those times, there is often U.S. CIA involvement in these civil wars. Never mind that.
Yeah, we can't mention that. Yeah.
Yeah, now we're gonna go back to that. But we do know, like, okay, I understand that some Latinos, that we're building on our history that we've learned from other experiences, right? And this is part of the reason why we just need a wider conversation on immigration and immigration enforcement. Like, why do we feel, as you said, why do we feel able to divide ourselves into these categories of better and worse and right way and wrong way? And certainly those in power are ripe to exploit it too.
Let's go back to the psychological effects for a second there. And Rhonda's, what does that do? Are there any long-term longitudinal studies about what happens to these children? They're 5, 6, the children who you mentioned have to step up and become adults overnight. How does that play out in the long run, 10, 15 years later?
So Rhonda's absolutely right. I mean, it's terrible for children, right? And to give a few examples, one of the things that has to happen is parents, often mothers, will decide if they're going to lie to their children about the detained other parents. In the best case scenario, they lie to their kid and say, your dad's at work. And I've seen this many times, multiple times, heard it many times. And then the dad gets out for whatever reason, paid a bond, out on humanitarian parole, etc. So kind of got off with that lie. But eventually the child will find out and then has to come to terms with this, what could potentially be seen as a betrayal, at a minimum as a lie and a secret. And the fact that the dad either did or could have gotten deported. And these are the kind of questions that happen over the long term and that parents have to wrestle with. You also just see, mentally hard on the children. Absolutely. Oh, to Lawrence's point or question, are there other longitudinal studies? Not really, because it's hard to track children over the long term. And for another reason that I think is hard to, I didn't fully understand until I was really deep into this work. It's hard for longitudinal study. Usually there's something that happens and you see over the course, like how something changes. But often there's so many deportations that happen in a child's life. It's really hard to pinpoint, like, what was the kind of traumatic event. I know one of the women that I was one of the 3 primary protagonists in the first book. Her first husband was deported. Then she remarried, and the second husband actually died in a car accident. And then the third husband was deported, came back and was deported again. So, the same older son has seen, and his uncle was also deported. So 4 different, 3 or 4, I think it was, men taken from his life. So longitudinal, what are the impacts? Sometimes it's hard to say because deportation is so much more common in many immigrant communities than I think the outside public really realizes. But Rhonda, I will say the longitudinal studies, one of the things that happens is schools end up with tons of data, right? And so sometimes we can use these data in schools and see if anything's happened related to immigration. And there was some pretty creative studies that did this. You look at a study that's looked at the rate in Bean Station in Tennessee and in Sumner, Texas, and these are both Trump won in 2018. And we see
the rate of what?
Bean Station, Tennessee, and Sumner, Texas. This was during Trump won in 2018.
You said they looked at the rate of. What were they looking for?
Oh, I said look at the raid. Yeah, looked at the rate. But I'll get to the rate. So they did look at the rate too, and they actually looked at the rate of absenteeism and children leaving the district, and they looked at grades. And all of those went down. Well, absenteeism went up, and grades went down, and leaving the district went up, just among Latino students, so not among their white peers. So without a doubt, Rhonda, in addition to these, emotional and psychological effects, there's a huge educational component to these type of events, right? And that we saw these effects from large-scale raids because lots of people were taken out at the same time. But it also happens to the everyday average. After the everyday average deportation, it happens to 1 or 2 kids individually too. Um, this might be a way you want to take it, the conversation or not, Dr. L, but one of the things that I learned here too is that, mass deportation is going to hit families first, and it's going to hit the nation's educators second, because over and over, it was teachers who explained to their students that the parents who dropped them off are not going to be the ones who pick them up. It was teachers who had to make sure their student buses got to homes that weren't empty. And it was teachers who have to make up for these educational gaps, right? And so, part of the untold story is that the deportation is not just impacting that person removed nor the family. It's impacting society on certainly an economic level, but it's also taking a lot of the time for your kids' teachers, because those teachers are dealing with the impact of mass deportation.
Mm. You mentioned a lady who was married and her husband got deported. Then her second husband died. I mean, how many people and the third husband got deported and came back? How many people returned back after being deported? They go for $1 million. Let's just say, if they get $1 million in 1 year, they're not going to get that. But if they get $1 million in 1 year, how many of those will return, etc.?
Yeah. An interesting question. So I know a couple of things. I can't give a number because I just don't know it. But I do know a couple of things. Return migration, circular migration rather, used to be very common. And when it was common, often farm workers would come and return often back to Mexico in a circular migration, and families would stay in Mexico. So one of the effects of building this security apparatus that includes a border wall, right, and more just security on the southern border, is that folks are more apt to bring their families up to the U.S. And the average stay of somebody who's undocumented, I think it's 22 years now. And, I always have in my classes, I have them go through like what milestones happen in 22 years. And, it's so many birthdays, driver's license, you turn 16, expand a little farther out, kids, baptisms, all kinds of stuff, right? So the average person just has a lot of life in the U.S. Your question about how often do they return? So my answer is far less than they used to, and I think even much less now, because it's expensive. Like it costs a lot financially, and it's really dangerous. So I think it'll happen less and less. Part of what that means is that when one parent is deported, that remember the family who's back home, who may not be undocumented, is having to decide if they're going back home too. And I've seen quite a few families just say like, it's not worth it here without father. So let's take children back to somewhere they've never been, pull them out of school, etc.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. How many families then say, okay, daddy's not here, let's all go back to our home? I mean,
yeah, I think it happens way more often than we know, but it's an interesting kind of statistical and research question, because it's this data that's fairly hard to get, right? You'd have to know who was deported, and then you'd have to know who was connected to them. Then you'd have to ask them in a country that's, you'd have to speak the language and find them in these other countries. So these are lots of the parts of deportation that we just don't know about. Leslie brings up that Leslie says our ESL adult students skipped in-person classes because of the fear of ICE. And Leslie, this is something I'm always trying to explain. So you kind of hit the nail on the head, is that actual deportation is very important, right? That raid is really important, but it's also what people do the other 364 days that the raid didn't happen, but they thought it might. And what do? Skip ESL classes, don't take their kids to school, don't go to the doctor, right? And there's ripple effects to this that include many, including use of our collective, but collective taxpayer money to do things like treat illnesses when folks are in the ER, when they could have had preventative care all along, right here, because they avoided prenatal care. So, as Garrett was saying above, and others usually say, yeah, this is a law issue, sure. But it's really important for us as members of society, members of a community, to think about all those other impacts. No matter what we think about the law, no matter what we think about those enforcing it, we just got to be aware of what else is going on, right? And we want to treat with compassion and humanity those who are, our communities, and perhaps not even, I would argue, we always want to treat everyone involved with compassion and humanity. But my point here is part of our question is, how do we keep that compassion and humanity in our whole community, regardless of what law is being broken?
I want to go back to, and this is again, this is my main contention is the expansion of law enforcement and the expansion of the potential problems that it may have, not only for what we've been talking about in the undocumented, but also what the citizens may encounter. Let's just say they achieved their goal, and what do you do with ICE? What do you do with all these workers? You're going to put them somewhere. You're going to do something with them. You're not going to have built these $1 million facilities and then not put someone in them. So this is a genuine fear of mine. So I want to play a video here about a guy who, I think he was a Canadian citizen, was living in New Hampshire for years, got a arrest record, and then went back to Canada to see family or something like that, and then wasn't able to come back. And he voted for Trump. So I'm going to play this video here. So this says New Hampshire man denied re-entry to U.S. after Canada visit. Very uncertain for me right now.
I'm a legal resident green card holder. I have been since 1981.
Chris Landry has lived in New Hampshire since he was 3 years old. He has a partner, 5 children, and a job in manufacturing. He was stopped at the border in Holton, Maine on Sunday while returning from a family vacation to Canada.
They pulled me aside and started questioning me about my past convictions in New Hampshire.
3 hours later, the 46-year-old was told he couldn't come home despite having a green card and being a legal U.S. resident. He spoke to us from New Brunswick, Canada.
They denied me re-entry and said, don't come back or we will detain you. And the only way for me to get back in was to see an immigration judge.
In 2004 and 2007, Landry faced charges of marijuana possession and driving with a suspended license, but says he's had no criminal record since. He was given a suspended sentence and paid his fines.
So I never thought that would threaten my status as a resident of the United States.
U.S. Customs and Border Protection telling us in a statement, possessing a green card is a privilege, not a right. And under our nation's laws, our government has the authority to revoke a green card if our laws are broken and abused. Lawful permanent residents presenting at a U.S. port of entry with previous criminal convictions may be subject to mandatory detention and or may be asked to provide additional documentation to be set up for an immigration hearing.
Just very uncertain for me right now. I might end up spending the rest of my life in Canada, and who knows if I'll ever even have the right to re-enter the United States at this point.
Landry, who lives in Peterborough, New Hampshire, was with 3 of his children when he was stopped at the border. The children will make their way home in the days ahead. Landry says he goes to Canada at least once a year and has never had a problem until now. Why do you think this time it's a problem?
Because of the new administration and their new policies.
As a Canadian citizen, he couldn't vote for president, but he did support Donald Trump.
I was definitely, all for Make America Great Again and having a strong, unified country and a bright future for my 5 American children. But now I feel a little differently.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay.
So I got to stand corrected. I thought he voted for him. He just supported him. So I'd like your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think, going back to what you said earlier, it was he did not see himself as that kind of immigrant, right? Trump is not talking about me. He's talking about those people, and the net of those people keep expanding. Per the comment section, when we talk about the law as if the law is the law, we have to stand for something. The law's way fuzzier than that, right? We forget that there's interpretation in the law, not the least of which is how we enforce it and to whom and when. He, was obviously, given my work, given everything that I'm saying, clearly, right? He was a permanent resident. All he did was smoke marijuana and get a ticket, which he paid. Should he be allowed to remain in the U.S.? Of course, I would argue yes, right? But the law is the law, so he's out because, and what we're seeing here is like, yeah, but this is not proportional to what's going on, right? This is way out of proportion. they said a few interesting things in that video. One is that his kids returned home, and home was in the U.S., right? And I would argue, you would argue, and he would probably argue that his home was also in the U.S. with his kids. But that is not the argument that the court is making. The argument is that
he had a job. He had a job, and
yeah,
yeah. It's too bad. I think the last question here, although I tend to lie a lot about that.
That's
so,
all right.
So we saw this guy. He had a partner, and obviously, who knows what's going to happen. We talked before about the woman who, one partner died, and the circular thing. How many divorces go on through this? I mean, is that tracked at all? That's got to be tough too, right?
So it's a really good question. There's actually, so when you are becoming a citizen, the person who's undocumented often has to go back to their country of birth and then enter again legally, right? So if you've entered once illegally, you often have to go back during the visa process, apply after entering, and so that you can enter legally. And there's a lot of divorces and separations then, and that's kind of planned and known, right? So that's not even deportation. It's not tracked, it's not established, but absolutely, I would say it happens. One of the other really tricky things that I didn't realize is people are just not deported to the same place. I know so many couples who are Honduran and Mexican. And why? Because that's the particular communities that meet in whatever the place is, right? Whether it's LA or Washington County, right? You mix immigrant groups, you mix race, everything. So when you deport one person and you send them back to Costa Rica, and this is the case of my friend, and his wife is from Mexico, like, where do you go? Like, she has no roots there. He doesn't have roots there within the past 25 years, but and if they have kids, which they didn't, so the kids are going to go to a country that they know or mom knows. So, to go back to your question, is it divorce and separation? I would, without numbers on it, I would say, yeah. I mean, relationships are one of the biggest, one of the biggest losses of deportation is all kinds of relationships, marital, parental, siblings. You also see folks who die in countries of birth, and folks who are undocumented in the U.S. can't go back to their parents' funerals. So these are definitely sad cases. And I think, going to what we've talked about this throughout this session and what we see in the chat too, right, is I appreciate when folks, even if no matter what side of the aisle you're on, no matter how you view the law being the law, that we understand with immigration and everything else, right, incarceration, healthcare policy, Medicaid, that there are repercussions to how we enforce the law, and we need to be aware of them, right? So, we may have differing views on those laws, but we should all absolutely be aware of what happens when we enforce them. Like, what is the fallout? How does it, perhaps you need to know how it impacts you. Good, let's see how it impacts you. But we can all think about how it impacts us, throughout our communities and throughout our economy.
Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate your time. I don't want to belabor it. I know that you probably have some papers to correct or whatever.
I am grading. I was grading before this, but I don't tell my students, but for the moment, I'd rather be here than grading. So
you having the same problem I am with these ChatGPT stuff? Are you having the same problem? It's driving me nuts.
Yeah, no, you don't ask. You gotta change the questions you ask for sure. Don't ask for a summary of anything anymore. No.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Tell us about, you have do you post on Instagram? I know you have an Instagram. Do you post there, or you got a book coming up? Push that a little bit more.
I used to post on Twitter, on X, but it is a little out of control right now, so I'm pausing on that. But I do use Instagram. I'll put my name in the chat, and my book is called Raiding the Heartland: An American Story of Deportation and Resistance. Comes out on September 23rd, published by Johns Hopkins. So I look at 6 different worksite raids that happen throughout the rural U.S. But even if you're not from the rural U.S., right, I unfortunately am talking about many topics that are currently relevant in the news, like ICE and the ruses they use when they're enforcing immigration law. So thanks. Yeah, Lawrence, it's always great to talk. And Rhonda, Garrett, I believe Leslie, although her name scrolled up, Yoli, thanks for being a great audience. So appreciate it.
No, thank you so much. And if you haven't if you don't get pick up the book that he's got coming out. This is the book that he has right now, Separated. This one, I got this obviously on hardcover. Is it on Kindle or?
It is. It's on Kindle, paperback, and audiobook too. I did not read the audiobook. Funny inside information. You have to try out to read your own audiobook. So it is possible that your own voice does not adequately represent your own written voice, which I think is hilarious. So I'm hoping I can actually read the next one.
I've been using Speechify to like go through papers and stuff, and you can add your voice to Speechify.
Okay.
But you can't do that to audiobook. And now I was so used to listening to my own voice on Speechify. Then I went to audiobook. I'm like, I can't listen to this. This is not me.
right. That you can't hear your own voice. Yeah, I put in the chat. I realize it's going just to you. So it's Dr. Lopez on Dr. Lopez on immigration is my.
I'll see if I can copy it here. I'll see if I can copy it. Yeah, I can copy it. I'll put it in the chat here.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. Well, probably grade in the morning, but if you have any grading, you should do it better now. No better time than now to grade.
I usually grade in the morning. Yeah, I grade in the morning, get it all done with. Yeah. So all right, brother. Thank you so much.
Night. Yeah.
You guys, you too. Thank you guys so much for joining. Make sure you hit the like button. If you watch this in the future, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, all that kind of good stuff. And we're going to come back with some police videos, all that kind of good stuff. So take care of yourselves. Much love and peace.
Yeah. Bye.